Welcome back, everybody. This week we're going to talk about presenting your case. You've been through the interview process. You've got all your evidence lined up. You started with your investigative plan, and now you're coming to the end, and you're going to present your case. Before we get started, I want to apologize if there's a little bit of background noise. Here in Michigan, I think we have 4 seasons. We have spring, then we have lawnmower, then we have leaf blower. Then we have snowblower, and right now we're at toward the end of the leaf blower season here, and there's one going on either side of my house right now, and we don't settle for little small leaf blowers. These are huge, the backpack ones. Sometimes they're 2-man almost, right? Some folks have vacuums that go on their tractors and everything else, so they're kind of noisy. So if you hear a little bit of background hum, I apologize. This is the quietest part of the house, and if it starts to get a little noisy, I'll move around a little bit during the presentation. So again, let's talk about presenting your case, but first let's do a quick recap from last week. So recap of last week, and then a little war story for you. Last week we talked about laws and legal cases, and we know that laws change, and they change regularly because there's new interpretations, new precedents set with case law. You need to understand what laws and rules apply before you interview, especially. But realistically, you should understand them anytime you're doing investigations, right? From the very start, you should understand what laws and rules apply. So depending on what state you may be in, depending on what type of investigation you're doing, as I said last week, make that employment lawyer one of your best friends. Make sure you stay current on what you can. You can't be perfect, but you have to make the effort. And in fact, if you're ever challenged, you want to show that you made the effort to stay up on the laws. Now, one war story for you, because I just was handed a case. I refer to these as a case in a basket because somebody else started the case before me and did not do a exceptional job. In fact, they made some errors, and I had to take it from them and work the rest of the matter. In this particular case, there was a person who would come in the morning, and on the face of their computer in their shared office there were sticky notes, and over the course of about 2 months there were 8 sticky notes left, and they just said some combination of love or love you. They weren't threatening. They were creepy, right, but not threatening. And so the security investigator, who's a junior person and probably should have called for help, decided they were going to set up a covert camera to catch the person. And as we talked about before, whenever you set up covert cameras, you should probably have an employment lawyer go through that with you, and you want to make sure we didn't go over the use of them in this course. It was just too short of a course, but you want to make sure that you have a good view, and I will always recommend that if you can get a roof down view, if you can put a covert camera in a ceiling tile, that's the way you want to go because you can see a lot of movement that way. But they didn't. So these folks picked up something on the camera that they believed that implicated someone, and they made the case to HR, and HR fired the person. And the day after they fired the person, another note appeared. So they obviously had the wrong person. And what they did was they had evidence, video evidence, that they read into. The video will tell you what it sees. They read into the fact that the guy was doing one thing, he was doing another, right? He wasn't leaving a sticky note. He was actually a telephone repairman, and he was reaching to test a telephone. He was in the office. He reached over to check a dial tone and to dial a number, and his back was to the camera because of poor placement, so they assumed he was in that area of the sticky notes, so they said that's what he's doing, but he really wasn't. But one of the bigger problems they had was the opportunity. And if you remember correctly, I said one of the first things you want to do is check to make sure that anybody that you think might be a suspect was available to do the wrongdoing. And they didn't do that. And the person that was fired happened to be away from the office on a day when one of the notes was left, and the day before as well. So they didn't check opportunity. Very big error. Just a quick reminder, always prove that the person that you may suspect could have, that they were in the facility, in the location, at the building when the incident may have occurred, because if you can't prove that, then they're ruled out right away. And that opportunity error is a huge one that young investigators make. They don't show definitively the person was available every time something happened. That person could have been there. So there's your warning, real life story. We hired the person back. They were gracious about it and came back, but could have very well been a lawsuit. And we did identify the person who was responsible, and that case is still being disposed. So there you go. Opportunity. Always check it. So on to presenting your case. So now you're writing the case up, right? And every case will be presented in two ways, written and verbal. Always. If you have a finding, you will always be telling someone the story, and you will be writing the story. And the written may never be read by anybody but you, but it still needs to be done. Don't ever take an investigation verbally to somebody and not have a written account that matches what you tell them. You never want to do that because if there's a question in the case of this investigation I just talked about, the opportunity case, there was no written report. They did a verbal to HR. Decisions were made based on the verbal. And if the person sued us, we would also be saying that we never wrote the case up, which would have proven an insufficient investigation. And under the 7 tests, we would have been in a hard way, right? The verbal can be to HR, to decision makers, employment lawyers, outside counsel, law enforcement. The verbal goes to a group that's going to make a decision once you've got your written done. They're not going to want to just read your report. They're going to want you to do a briefing on it in every case. The written might go to HR lawyers, but you don't ever give the written to the manager of the person who is involved in an incident or others that don't have a true need to read. You may do a verbal to them. Don't give them the incident report because in it you may have other information. So let's just say that you had the person broke into the pop machine, right? The soda machine we had in previous lesson. And during the investigation, somebody said, well, I know it wasn't Bill because Bill snuck out that night and he wasn't around. You're not investigating Bill sneaking out, right? You're investigating the theft from the soda machine. But you're going to need to put in the report that Bill is exonerated from this case, right? He is definitely not the perpetrator because he had snuck out, and we have a witness that said he left the premises. Manager sees that and opens up a case on Bill. You don't really need that trail of cases, right? There's always something in a written report that would be embarrassing to somebody or cause somebody some grief, right? They may bring up that, I think it was Bill because I don't trust Bill. I've never trusted Bill. I don't even leave my stuff around when he's, unguarded when he's around because he's a thief. I just know he is. Well, do you want the manager to see that? Where the manager may have a good impression of Bill, that person who said that about Bill could be absolutely wrong, but it's prejudicial now. And it sticks in the manager's mind that maybe Bill is a thief. So you never share the written report unless you are absolutely forced to. You can share it with HR people. You can share it with attorneys. You can share it with decision makers if necessary, but seldom, if ever, should you share it. And I'll say never because I want you to stick with never, even though you might get overruled someday, that you share it with managers of people who are implicated in a report because it never goes well. So what is the purpose of the written report? Well, it might trigger some action, right? You have a finding, and it might trigger the action of termination or corrective action against an employee or a change in process or procedure. But it also proves the investigation was timely, complete, and fair. So timeliness in an investigation we talked about before. You can't drag your feet on an investigation and wait forever. People, especially people who are accused of something in the workplace, have a expectation and a right to have that matter disposed of quickly, right? One way or the other. And your written report will show the timeline of when you got the case, what you did, and when you did it. It can be cited in a legal action, be it a good one or a bad one, I guess, if you want to classify them that way. It could be in a criminal case, but it could also be in a civil case against your company for an incomplete investigation. So it may be cited, so that's part of its purpose. It clarifies your thinking, and in that I mean, I have written more than one report where I wrote something, I was writing the report and I said, ooh, I never did check this angle or that angle. I never did talk to that person. And as you're writing, it really kind of clarifies and organizes your thinking. And you'll find that I didn't do something. And you always, when you have those moments, you go back and do that thing, right? If it's enough to spark your interest, it's enough to go ahead and do it so that you can close all the loopholes. And I've never had one where I had that feeling and then went back and did something and it changed the outcome. But it very well could have, and you want to make sure you get the right outcome, right? And the other thing is that a written report can, when read by, say, an HR or a lawyer, they could say, you know, one of the problems we have is that soda machine is 2 buildings over, and it's never, around. People have to walk all the way over there, so it's very seldom there'll be more than one person there. Maybe we just want to move it closer, right? Preventative measure. If it's closer and it's real close to the workplace, or to the work site, right, to the department, those people working that night shift don't have to walk all the way across the campus to get to it. It'll be, viewed by people all the time. We know it has money in it. We know it's been broken into. Maybe we change the process. So there's valuable data in most reports that tell us how to prevent the next occurrence, right? What went wrong in policy, procedure, practice that allowed this to happen? And that type of triage after an event is hugely important so that you don't keep investigating the same things over and over again. So what are some of the musts that you have with a written report? Well, you all know that, you have to write it with the who, what, when, where, how, why. But it has to be organized in such a way that anybody, either internally or externally, can make sense of the thing. Chronologically is probably the best way to go, but also breaking it down by the elements in your investigative plan and then chronologically inside of that. So, the what will give, what happened and when it happened, or the when comes next, right? And then you have your witnesses, and if you do those chronologically, do them in order as you talk to them. Each section can be chronological, but you want to make sure that you have that level of organization. If it goes for criminal consideration and you have a disorganized report, it will come back to haunt you because the defense will get a copy of your report. In discovery, if your report is used by law enforcement as a basis for anything, when someone is accused in a legal case, they may request a copy of that report to aid in their defense. Perfectly legal, and it will go there. You want to make sure that you have all the facts. That's fair, right? But if you have a report that is totally assailable, right? It's so disorganized, nobody can make heads or tails of it. It makes it look like you're not a very good investigator, and a judge or jury will find that as well. Also omit any detail of internal terms, places, and acronyms. You see this all the time. Joe Smith, manager of DCM in Building 14, Level L, was in the XYZ lab working on Project Neo. Well, to me, that is something that might mean something because I work in the building. I know what that department acronym is. I know what area they're talking about in that building. And I know what that project is because I'm working on that project too. So when I read that report, it makes sense to me. To somebody on the outside reading that report, you might as well be speaking Martian. Okay? Make it very simple. He is the manager of this, right? Spell it out so that people understand. So if he's the manager of medicinal chemistry and biologics, biometrics, right? He is lead chemist, right? Simplify it. Use the title, but simplify it when you need to so that anybody could understand what the person does. Also, acronyms are very common in businesses. SRU is an acronym, right? It's Slippery Rock University, call it that. If you're going to use an acronym, list it out first, Slippery Rock University the first time, and then put in brackets or parentheses after it, SRU. Then you could call it SRU after that, but you always have to spell those things out. Something you all know is it has to document your investigative findings objectively and accurately. Again, my guys, if they wrote up that report with that camera incident, they would have said they saw the person pick up a sticky note on their camera because that's what they thought they saw. But that wasn't accurate. That's not what they saw. They saw the back of a person by a desk place his hand to the right and downward toward the surface of the desk. That is all you could tell from that video. And so that's what you need to see. Now, you could make conjecture that no one else went near that desk, and therefore he must have been the person that left it. But and I won't say conjecture, you can make a reasonable statement that it is more likely than not that if no one else went near that desk during the entire course of the day, and you had full video, which they didn't have, they had motion-sensed video on a very poor camera, which really added insult to injury. So they couldn't really tell if anybody else had gone there. But if no one else had gone there, you could say that this is what he did. He put his hand down to the right, and it appeared that he picked up something, which was true in the video, and then it appeared he put the something or a something back down and then left the room. That is objective and accurate. To say the person picked up the sticky notes and then put a sticky note down, you couldn't see that in the video, even if you assumed it. And you want to say that it's likely because no one else went near the desk, you can say that, but that would be accurate. You can't accurately say that's what happened, right? Exactly. And you have to provide decision makers with enough information to determine what that action we talked about might be. So, if you don't give them enough information as to what happened, why it happened, how it happened, it's not going to help them when they decide, is this person going to stay with the company? How do I correct this action? So you've got to give enough information, and that's a must. Sometimes reports just leave out so much information that a decision maker looks at it and says, I don't know what to do with this. I know something happened, and I know that the investigator thinks Bill did it, but I don't understand how, and I don't understand when and where. So it has to give enough information. It has to be thorough. Some of these don'ts on written reports you will see in the reading, and I was kind of glad because I wrote the lecture before picking some of the readings, and I'm glad that they supported this. Don't use terms like guilty. So-and-so was guilty of doing this, or so-and-so did it. You are just saying that the evidence you have either substantiates or is unsubstantiated, or the investigation found that it was unsubstantiated that the person was involved, right? It supported or it didn't support. Don't say the person is guilty. Don't say they did it. Just that the evidence supports that they had involvement, okay? Don't ever put I think in a report. I think this happened, or I believe. You can say that evidence supports, but we all think, and sometimes we think wrong. So when I see I think in a report, I always just strike it out. Same with my opinion, especially if your case goes to court. You say, in my opinion, even if you say, in the investigator's opinion, this, the evidence supports or does not support the following. It's a kiss of death in court if you say my opinion or I think, because you will get blown out on a witness stand because you'll have to explain why you think that. And you can't just say, well, I had this feeling. I started to think this, and it just goes bad. And then just really simple, don't use odd fonts. Don't bold anything in a report. You don't bold anything other than headers. Don't bold anything in a report. Don't play with the fonts because it adds emphasis. If you bold it, it becomes more important than other evidence, and everything should be of equal weight. So, if you bold that so-and-so told you that so-and-so did it, if that's bolded in a report, it's going to stick in the reader's mind that is a statement of fact, and you need to be able to prove it. So don't bold anything. Everything gets the same amount of weight. So what does this written report kind of look like? Well, first off, you're going to really love the fact that you have an investigative plan, because if you used OneNote, you just need to write a synopsis of what your findings were, a few paragraphs about, this kind of a abstract, if you will, of the report, and then you could print out your OneNote. Okay, you need to mention every document, artifact, witness you examined. Okay, everything that you examined needs to be listed in the report. Hugely important. Remember that. Even if it had no value. Okay? If I interviewed somebody and they just tell me, look, I wasn't even here. I call in, they say, nah, I went out sick later in that shift. I didn't see any of that. Or I just wasn't in a place where I could have, helped you with this because I just, didn't witness anything. Then you say, I interviewed John, and John had no information relative to the matter at hand. But you want it listed because someone will come back and say, did you talk to John? You want that cleared up already. So even if you talk to them and they have nothing to add, even if you looked at a document, because you said, I want to look over the, whatever record, the expense report of somebody, and then you find it and there's nothing in there that supports your case, you examined the expense report of John and it had no information relative to the matter at hand. Okay? Your interview notes go into the file. but you don't need to recap anything but the relevant. So when you're writing your synopsis, you don't need to say in the synopsis that I interviewed John and he didn't have anything to say. In your synopsis, you just say, I interviewed Bill and Bill told me that he thought Sue did it, right? The important stuff goes in the synopsis. Interview notes go into the file, but you don't need to recap anything in your synopsis other than the documents or the people that were helpful to help your matter. So, everybody you talk to and every document, any artifact that you look at gets documented. And if it didn't have value, you just say it didn't have value. In the synopsis, you mention anything of value that helped you get to your conclusions. So let's talk real quick about the format of this written report. So first off, stick with the facts, okay? Only. As with the verbal, this is only going to be facts. Write in short sentences. And so, in college, you kind of get to the point where, and I think we all get there, where we try to make very complex sentences because it makes us sound smart. Well, you don't need to sound smart in an investigative report. You need to sound competent. And one of the articles I noticed made the comment, people like to stop and take a breath. So write in short sentences. On Tuesday, August 4th, I interviewed Bob. Bob met me in the conference room on the second floor of Building 200. Bob was advised that he needed to be truthful and that our interview was confidential, it would not be shared with others, and that he was to report any retaliation for participating in the interview. That type of short sentence. Don't do a whole lot of ands, right? Because I always say think 7th grade level, because you just want those proper, grammatically correct sentences that are short, and each one has its own statement. Okay? I break down my reports by the elements in my investigative plan. I use OneNote now, but I didn't always. But I would write a report that I would have a synopsis, and then I would list. My header was what. My second one was when. My third header was where, and I would list all of the things that I found in the course of the investigation under those headers. Okay? It doesn't have to be fancy. As long as it contains the information and has all the information in it, the format is not really as important, right? It doesn't need to look like a police report, right? But there are generic forms out there. I would suggest you only use those generic forms for very, very basic investigations. You may want to have one of those on the side for the occasional stolen coffee cup, right? Somebody calls you and says, somebody was in my office, my coffee cup that my kids gave me that, tells the world that I'm the best dad in the world is gone. Please come send somebody down. Start an investigation. You're really not going to do much of an investigation on a coffee cup unless you happen to run into somebody carrying it down the hallway. But you'll take a report, and you will close it out pretty quick as an unfounded. You can use a form for that, but I would not suggest you use those online forms that you find for much. They really aren't thorough enough. Stick with your investigative plan and use that as your sections for a written report, either in OneNote or some other way. I print out mine in OneNote, okay? But an essay style with listing what, when, where, how as the headers and then writing underneath that is perfectly acceptable. In OneNote, you attach the evidence into each section, right? So you can put video clips and things like that into there. Essay format, it's a little bit harder, but you do them as an addendum. But with video, it's kind of hard to do that. So you'll just reference the video as video available at and wherever you store it, right? Probably in the security office, right? In a fireproof safe, which is where you store your stuff. But don't get hung up too much on having to have a fancy format. Again, if you're using OneNote, I can't say enough about it, and I know that I've harped on it. You don't have to, but it sure is an easy tool to do an investigation in and to keep yourself straight and attach evidence in and actually put video clips and voice clips and those things right into the pictures, right into the file. So, use what you want to use. Don't use those online forms for any complex investigations. You'll be disappointed in your result. And keep the writing in that report very simple, straightforward, short sentences, 7th grade level. So where do these written reports go? Well, they may go to the police after a legal review. If you're going to go criminal with a case, you want your lawyer to look over it and make sure there's nothing in there that's, company specific. and it may go to the police. It never goes to direct managers. Manager says, hey, you investigated one of my guys for this. I'd like a copy of that report, please. No. And you got to make it a firm no. No, you'll need to get that through HR. And the person rolls their eyes, leaves your office, and you pick up the phone, you call HR right away and say, so-and-so is coming down to get a copy of that report. In it, it may have information that we don't want released. Can we talk about it? And they will. But never hand it to a direct manager, okay? Especially if it's the manager of somebody named in the report. Now, HR may want a copy, but you should set up a process with your HR people. Who's going to maintain the documentation? It could be that you write it and you give it to them and they maintain it, or you maintain it, but you don't want two copies really floating around. You want a master copy and you want it kept somewhere. Electronically is best, obviously, right, and protected. But you shouldn't have a lot of copies of these things floating around because they tend to be laid out. You don't know what anybody else's information security practices might be, as much as you hope they practice good, hygiene of printed documents. It's not always the case. Get a safe or fireproof high security cabinet for your copies. They're expensive. You don't need a big one because it's just for investigative files, but you want something that is highly secure. Safe, will run you $1,000 and probably about the same for a small fireproof high security, a Fire King they're called. I think that's the manufacturer of almost all of them. You'll want one of those to put your reports in. And then remember, on any reports that have personally identifiable information, dates of birth, home addresses, home phone numbers, if you put it in there before you distribute it, you keep it in your copy, but you redact it. You put a line through it, right? A black line where you can't see it so that you're not passing around somebody if it's got their employee ID number or their social security number, even if it's a crime where they, were using their social security number to as a piece of identification to buy things, or it's germane to the case. You always need to block those things out before you distribute the report, even to the police. Never put out personally identifiable information on anyone because you are responsible for it. So you've got your written report all taken care of. You got it all buttoned up. You've gone through it. It's written simply enough. You didn't have conjecture. Now you're going to go to a verbal. So verbal is when you go like to HR or to a leadership group, because they're going to want a briefing. They're not going to want to read that report. Just isn't how it's done. So you're going to go in with your synopsis, a time frame, locations, the who, the why, if you have it. You're going to talk about who your witnesses were. And then you're going to make a verbal comment on management cooperation. In the course of the investigation, everyone that I talked to was cooperative, and I believe that they were truthful. Or, I was stonewalled by management. They wouldn't produce witnesses that I need. Or, I spoke to 5 witnesses, and all but Bob were thought to be truthful, but I believe that Bob may have been less than truthful, and in fact, other corroborating evidence suggests that he was not truthful. You don't put that necessarily in the report, right? Unless you are relying on Bob's word and Bob really stonewalled you, then it must go there. But the verbal's where you can have a conversation. First you give the synopsis of your written, and then you can have a conversation about whether or not you think that you got the cooperation you needed to do the full investigation. That's why a verbal is really important for you. So let's talk about this verbal briefing you're going to give, right? Stick to the facts, never conjecture, just like your written. Use your written as either your script or at least your reference notes for your verbal, right? Have it with you because you've already written it, and go through it. You don't need to read it word for word, but go through it, and it's a great way to keep organized in your verbal presentation. You're going to be asked, but isn't it possible that this happened? But couldn't it have gone, could it be this way? Could it be that way? If you know the answer because you have a piece of evidence, well, couldn't Dave have been the one that did it? Well, no, Dave was accounted for. We know where he was. We saw him on video in a different part of the building at this time. So we know that it wasn't Dave, right? You have evidence. If you don't have evidence, but you have ruled out Dave because you know other evidence strongly suggests it was Bob. I keep picking on Bob. Poor Bob. But Bob's the guy who did it because you have all overwhelming evidence that he did. And somebody says, but isn't it possible that Dave could have been involved in this? Could be the person has a problem with Dave and they're just trying to throw him under the bus. And you can answer that by saying it is possible, but it is not likely. It is less likely than likely, right? anything is potentially possible. Could it have been people, coming down from Mars in a spaceship that stole the money out of the soda machine, got back in the ship and went up there? It is possible if you believe in, Martians. And maybe they're there. I don't know. But it is less likely than likely that the soda machine was broken into by Martians. And if it is the case, then I would suggest, give me a call because I want to see that report. But it is less likely than likely is an acceptable answer when you're having a verbal briefing, and people will challenge you, so you need to be prepared for that. You'll go over your investigative plan and give the answers. Really, that's what the verbal is. So in order to do this, this is the piece of policy that we believe was violated. This is what I use for my standard and my proofs. And I ask the following questions. Where did this happen? Well, I went and I checked, and it was the only soda machine on the property that was broken into that day, so we've relegated to that area only. That's my where, right? Go over your investigative plan, go over your investigative report, go over what you want to do, but don't be rushed. You will find people when you start saying, yeah, okay, we got all that, but just get to the part about who did it. Don't fall for that. Always say, no, I think we really need to go over the entire facts because, this is important to somebody's career. And if we don't have time now, I can come back another time if we want to do that. But I think it's important that we go over everything. And you've got to have the strength to say that to senior leaders because they're busy people, but they can't be too busy to not listen to the facts when it comes to somebody's livelihood. Okay? You can't really say it that way. Just tell them that, look, if this isn't a good time, I can come back when we do have the time, but I think it's important we go over the facts of the matter. Big one is don't get into the disposition game. Now, the disposition of a case is the punishment phase, if you will. I don't like to call it that because it's a real corrective phase. It could be punishment. It could be termination. It could be suspension. It could be loss of pay. It could be the person is not allowed to work a certain shift or go near a certain person. Whatever your company determines the outcome is for the person that was responsible for whatever the wrongdoing was, is the disposition. Okay, it's a word that's commonly used. Don't get into the disposition game at all. If somebody says, well, what are we going to do with Bob? Once you've done your briefing and you said, basically, all my evidence points to Bob as being the person who did it. Okay, well, what do you want to do with Bob? That is not your game. You don't want to be the judge and jury. And in the articles that you'll read this week, you'll notice that HR, when they do investigations, is often the investigator and the determiner of disposition. That's a really bad place to be. I don't know why they do that to themselves. And HR normally will do the investigations into harassment. They may call you in to help, especially if you're a good investigator. But they'll normally do the ones on harassment, sexual harassment, bullying, those types of cases. Those aren't normally a security type case. But you may have them. But they do the investigation. Then they determine what happens to the person. I don't like that. Be a fact finder. Don't be a judge. Be disinterested and detached. I don't care what happens to Bob. I'm telling you, my investigation took me to this place where I can tell you that I am highly confident that Bob committed this offense, this wrongdoing. What should happen to Bob? That is not my issue. And in fact, you may see Bob in the hallway the next day because all they did is slap his wrist. Right? You thought maybe he should have been fired, and he wasn't, and they basically just gave him a verbal warning. It may actually bother you a little bit because you got too interested in the outcome. You should only be interested in what your findings are. Okay, so when deliberations start on the disposition, you need to say, this really isn't my swim lane, right? My lane is the investigative point. I have brought you all the facts of the matter, and I will leave them with you. Let me know if you need any help when it comes to the disposition, in the end, right? If Bob's going to get fired, do I need to get his badge back? Do I need to walk him out? Do I need to help him get his personal effects and leave the facility? Do I need to put a warning out? Do I need to go to the police if you want to do that? I will do those things for you, but I will not make those decisions. And that is really important that you, as a security investigator, not get into the disposition game. So what are some of the dangers in presenting your matter when you're presenting to leadership, to HR, to employment lawyers, potentially the police? Presenting too early, right? Don't present your case till your case is tight, right? You've finished up everything. You've interviewed everybody you're going to interview. you've examined all your artifacts, you've written your report, and you have put closed on the bottom of that report, right? Then you're ready. Don't do a verbal before your written is done, ever. One of the things you have to worry about is anticipating questions. If you don't anticipate the questions, especially in the verbal, then you're going to get jammed up a little bit. Again, stick with that likely or not likely. If it's something that could have happened, but you know it didn't, right? Stick with the facts and be able to deflect those isn't it possible questions with either fact or the fact that what you're saying is, yeah, okay, it's the Martians, right? It's not likely. Presenting to the wrong people, and in that, I do recall one investigator that I know that was asked in a staff meeting to go over an investigation they had done. Now, it was safety and security people in the room, but there were a number of people, especially the ones on the safety side. It was a pure security matter, and it may have gone criminal. And the department manager, who was over safety and security at the time, said, I want you to go ahead and brief everybody on that investigation. And that's no. You just don't do that because you've got personal information on people. And again, presenting to the wrong people, meaning direct managers of people, is really not a way to go either. Make sure that your verbal and your written match. Don't say something that's different in your written report. Take your written report with you as your notes to read from or to reference during that verbal presentation. And then again, confidentiality. If you release people's personal information, or if you release sensitive information about them to people who should not know, you could end up, as we saw in the, I think it was the Thiessen case. He happened to lose that case because he was the one who defamed himself. He's the one who let the information out about himself. Therefore, the company didn't defame him. But if you're going to defame somebody, if that information gets out, it's not kept confidential, you may have a problem. So confidentiality, only the right people in the room, is one of the major things to protect yourself in a presentation. A couple more things to watch out for in your presentation: quoting legal descriptions. If you try to act like a lawyer and you are not a lawyer, then you are a really, really bad lawyer. Okay? Don't use things like beyond a shadow of a doubt. Don't use legal terms in your presentation because they have very specific meaning. And normally people don't use them right. They're more conjecture than they are fact, right? Just don't use legal descriptions. Scope creep is a big thing in investigations generally. You're investigating one thing and you come across something else. And I've had this happen to me in several cases where the minor case I was investigating ended up being a major, right? And, I went into one case that was simple vandalism and it ended up being a sensitive political matter. I went into one of misuse of company property, ended up being a counterfeiting case, an actual counterfeiting of U.S. currency. But I didn't just keep going with the case. Once I went in, I closed the matter of improper use of the company equipment and then started a second matter and linked it. Second matter opened up, totally separate report, totally separate investigation, with just that this investigation, the what was in response to investigation number whatever, which was on this, and the finding of that, it was found that. Don't stretch your topic because it gets really confusing. You can find investigations, especially if you find people that do bad things. You'll find out that they do lots of bad things. You're investigating for A, and while you're talking to witnesses and going through artifacts and evidence, they've also done B, C, D, E, and a little bit of F once in a while, right? Stop and get the findings for your matter and then move on to another matter with the same subject, same person. Don't try to stretch them all into one case. Again, the danger in presentation, and I've said this before, but emphasizing a more probable than not situation. Are you sure that Bob was the only one that was there? Based on the evidence I have and the video that I've reviewed and the witnesses I've talked to, it is more probable than not that Bob was the only one in that room. Right? Again, certainties are really hard to make in any description, in any investigative matter. You're looking for the more probable than not, the more likely than unlikely. Okay? The describing facts that the evidence doesn't clearly support. I think that case we talked about that I just had, that I just took over for somebody, where they said the person picked up the sticky notes and then put one back on the desk, when in fact he'd actually picked up the telephone. They had a back view of the person. They saw him reach down where the notes were, but actually he'd picked up the telephone receiver. You couldn't see because his body was in the way. And he just pushed a button on the speakerphone, listened for a dial tone, dialed in a code. He was a telephone repair guy, listened for a couple of beeps, and then set the receiver back down. It could have looked from the back like he'd picked up sticky notes. Maybe he was writing because he was moving his fingers. But that's not what they saw. So describe the facts that evidence substantiates. Don't try to make evidence more than it is, right? Don't read into it, especially in your presentation. And then going back more to the disposition, you can pontificate a little bit to say, I think this probably wouldn't happen at all if the soda machine was located in a building closer to the, to the factory floor, or if we, put in soda machines that worked on an access card and it just charged your account rather than having to put cash in them at all. You can say some of those things, but don't get too much into the lessons learned. Let somebody else do that. You again are the finder of facts. You're going to find who were the actors in this wrongdoing. You're going to bring that back and let others decide on the disposition and what policy and procedure changes should come about because of the matter. So a couple of takeaways. Well, one that's not written here is that the format of the written report really can be anything that you're comfortable with so long as it has all the information it needs. So again, I use OneNote, and I strongly suggest you do, unless you work for a company at some point that says, no, we have a specific form for this, then of course you'll use that. But if they don't, I think it's a really good tool. If not, an essay will do. But you're going to have a written report. They need to match. Both versions need to tell the same story. And always do the written before you go in to do a verbal. Don't ever take a verbal report to someone unless you've already done the written. Your investigation's not done until the written is done. If you go in with a verbal and then discover something else happens, then you're backtracking. It makes you look less credible. We substantiate and we support. We don't say the person is guilty or they did it. Our evidence substantiates the premise that Bob was involved in this matter. The evidence supports that Bob did indeed break into the soda machine on the second floor. The whole disposition thing, stay out of it. And let me spell it right. And I'll do it right now. There we go. Disposition. You know what disposition is. It is the punishment phase. It is the decision phase. It's what the judge, HR, employment lawyers decide to do with Bob now that Bob has been found. The evidence supports that Bob broke into the pop machine. They are satisfied that your investigation was complete. They will go into the disposition phase. You stay out of that. It is a bad place to be. It ruins your credibility as an investigator anyway. Don't let them have their power. You take yours. Finally, when you talk about facts, facts are facts. But then there are some things that are just likely more than unlikely or more probable than not. Specify that in your report. I have video evidence that showed Bob going into the break room and no one else. That is a fact. It is more likely than unlikely that anyone besides Bob was involved because he was the only one who entered the room. It is more probable than not that Bob is responsible for the break-in of the soda machine. That is the only way I can say that with any clarity and any confidence, because I can't say Bob broke into that machine unless I saw it. But my evidence substantiates and supports the fact that it is more likely than unlikely, or more probable than not, that this is how the events occurred. So that's it in a nutshell, presenting your case. It's something that you're going to need to practice. Just like everything else we've talked about, this course cannot make you a master investigator in 15 weeks. It doesn't work that way. This is something you're going to want to practice. You're going to want to have small investigations first. That could be your best friend so that you can get your pattern down about how you present a case and how you document your case. So those are the takeaways for this week. Let's talk a little bit about next. Oh, so it's this weekend next week. Okay, I lied. There's some reading, and you've probably already done that. I hope it's very simple reading. I think there's some pretty good articles. They're short. They're internet articles. One of them's got an annoying banner ad, but it's still, when we weigh the fact that you didn't have to buy a textbook for this course, I think it's a pretty good thing. So enjoy that lecture. You are done. Thank you. And then there's a quiz this week based only on this unit. It's going to be based on the reading and on the lecture. I don't think you're going to find it difficult at all. It's one of the easier quizzes, but I just think it's a couple things I want to drive home, make sure that you understand, so that when you write your first report and you present your first case, you do it in an effective way. Next week, we're going to start a review of all the units, and we'll start talking about the final, which is a paper. And I think that the paper is going to be the only part of the final for this course. But those of you who have done reflective papers for me before, the format is a little bit different for this course, so don't get started on it. I know lots of people like to start that early. You won't be able to start on the final until finals week. That is the rule of the university. So the first day of finals week, I will release the format for the paper. Expect to spend about 2.5 hours writing the paper. It's going to be, usually comes out somewhere around 3 pages long, and it will need to have some formatting done to it. But I think if when we talk about it next week, you'll get a fairly good idea of what you're going to write. You'll be able to make a nice outline and probably get it done in a little less time. But I would set aside 2.5 hours to get it done. With that, have a great week, and I will see you on campus.